Here's problem number 43 from the Chapter 8 review. In this problem, we're going to notice that in this interval of integration, that the denominator is going to equal 0, or in other words, there's a discontinuity in the integrand on that interval. So let's rewrite this. Noticing that the discontinuity is at -1, we're going to say we're going to go from -2 to -1 of d theta times the quantity theta plus 1 to the 3/2 plus the integral from -1 to 0 of d theta plus 1 to the 3/2. Now our rewrite of that will take into account that discontinuity, saying the limit, and that's an upper end, so I'll use the letter b as b approaches -1, in this case from the positive side, of the integral from -2 to b of d theta plus 1, and then the rewrite there, limit as a approaches -1, but that's going to be from the negative side of the integral from a to 0 of d theta plus 1 to the 3/2. Now over here I'm going to do a little side work, and I'm going to figure out what is the antiderivative of d theta over theta plus 1 to the 3/2. And I'm going to use a u substitution of theta plus 1. du is equal to d theta. And so my rewrite becomes u to the -3/2 du. If I add 1 to 3/2, I get 2/5. The reciprocal of 2/5 is 5/2 plus c, or 5/2 theta plus 1 to the 2/5 plus c. Let's transfer that answer back to our original problem, and we get the limit as b approaches -1 from the positive side of 5/2 theta plus 1 to the 2/5 is evaluated from -2 to b, plus the limit as a approaches -1 from the negative side of 5/2 theta plus 1 to the 2/5 as evaluated from a to 0. I'm going to take this constant 5/2, pull it out all the way to the front. The limit as b approaches -1 from to the positive side of b plus 1 to the 5/2 minus -2 plus 1 to the 5/2, plus the limit as a approaches -1 from the negative side. Oops, there's a 5/2 out here now, of 0 plus 1 to the 5/2 minus a plus 1 to the 5/2. Now, when I apply this limit, I get 1 minus 1 to the -5 to the 5/2. That's 1 minus 1 is 0, so that ends up becoming 5/2 times 0 minus -2 plus 1 is -1. I have this written wrong. This is 2/5. It's wrong here as well, 2/5. -1 to the 2/5. Well, -1 squared is 1. 5th root of 1 is 1. And then I got a plus. I've got a 5/2. From here, I get a positive 1. And from here, when I apply that limit, I get the 2/5, 0 to the 2/5, or 0. And so you can see I'm going to get a -5/2 and a positive 5/2, or it does converge, and it converges to 0.